At the time, my family of three, my mom, my brother and I, lived in your typical middle-class Canadian suburb, quiet, predominantly white, and moderately friendly. Basically, I'm saying it was safe and there was never really any reason to worry about any sort of harm coming your way. At that age, I used to spend way too much time on the internet. Read, I was addicted. Because of this, I regularly skipped leaving the house, and was subsequently left home a lot. The vast majority of that time was spent on chat sites or socially oriented online multiplayer games. On one such night, the phone rang. The caller ID read, "Private Call." This didn't bother me at all. My uncle, who called at least once a week from Newfoundland, had his number privatized. Naturally, I pick up the phone and say hello, expecting it to be him. Instead I get, "Hello, how are you doing tonight?" A man, he sounds older, at least 40. I didn't recognize the voice, but his tone was so casual that I assumed he must be a family friend calling for my mom. As I didn't get out of the house much, I didn't know any of my mother's friends, so it wasn't unusual for me not to recognize someone's voice over the phone. I kept up conversation cordially. You know, the usual, "How are you? I'm good. How are you?" kind of thing. That is until he starts repeatedly asking about my day. "How was your day today?" This makes me think he must actually be a family friend. Who else asked for the details? All the same, I'm a little bit uncomfortable. I was awkward like any teenager and didn't want to socialize with my parents' friends. I answered with, "Not much, really. Just sat around the house. By the way, I'm really sorry, but I'm not sure who this is." "Don't you recognize my voice?" The man sounded only mildly shocked in a very fake sort of way, but mostly like he was looking for a way not to answer the question. He laughed awkwardly as he attempted to skirt around it. "No, I'm sorry." He still didn't attempt to tell me his name, so I asked again, "So, who is this?" I can't believe you don't recognize my voice. Wow. Tell me more about your day. Now I'm feeling really uncomfortable since he still won't tell me who he is. This might sound weird, but the content of what he was saying wasn't exactly uncommon where I live. People joke with you and tease you a lot. That being said, usually the joking ends if someone can tell you're being serious. I took what I thought was the easy way out. Maybe he thought I was my mom. This happened a lot too. Well, this is Sickles and Crows. "Are you looking for my mom?" "She's not home right now, but I can tell her to call you back when she's home." "Oh, Sickles. No, I'm not looking to talk to your mom. I really wanted to talk to you about your day." The way he said my name implied that he hadn't known it before I just told him. And he wanted to talk to me? I scrambled to say that I have to go and hang up, knowing I just made a big mistake. I'm anxious to tell my mom the story when she gets in, but she didn't seem bothered by it in the slightest and just chalked it up to a wrong number. I decided to leave it at that too. Of course, that's not the end of the story. The next week, I get another call. Again while my mom is out. Again, not my uncle. I hang up immediately. A few more days pass and I get another call. At this point, I'm scared to be home alone because this guy somehow knows when I'm by myself. Since I only ever got called when my mom and brother weren't home. My addiction was still stronger though, and I decided to test my theory by watching my mom leave through the window next time she went out. Quite literally, the moment her car leaves the driveway, the phone rings. This time I'm not fucking around. The best you can at a sheltered 16. He's still too inquisitive and friendly. Hi, Sickles, how are you tonight? I'm fine, who is this? You still don't recognize my voice. How are you feeling tonight? No, who the fuck is this? Why do you keep calling me? Leave me the fuck alone. We repeat this little circle 3 or 4 times, me getting increasingly frustrated and scared, him always trying to interrupt me, till he finally says something that makes me stop in my tracks. Are you sure you're feeling alright? Having any boy troubles? Now I'm seriously panicked and scared for myself. Just before my mom left the house, I had been telling an online friend about a boy sending me mixed messages. The worst part is he sounded genuinely concerned. I screamed at this guy to stop calling me, hang up, and immediately dial my mother. She's annoyed that I'm making something out of nothing and begging her to come home when she's visiting with her friends. However, she agrees to come home, saying she'd be about 10 minutes. We hang up, and I feel a little better. At least soon I'll be safe. However, the moment I hang up, the phone is ringing in my palm. Private caller. This part had never happened before. He never called back after I hung up any of the other times. Again and again. This guy calls. And my house is exploding with noise of all 5 of our house phones ringing over and over again. This does nothing for my anxious mind, which is cooking up all the ways I could die right now. My heart is absolutely racing out of my chest. I'm too scared to move from where I was huddled on our living room couch, constantly looking left and right, and listening as hard as I could for any other sound over the ringing of the phones. 45 minutes later, my mom finally shows up, and I am at my wit's end. I'm practically on my knees begging, crying for her to call the cops, which she does with much irritation towards me. While the cops said they couldn't do much about it right then and there, their presence was enough. The calls stopped for good. Was that online friend I'd been talking to actually an online predator? I doubt it, because I had Skyped with that particular friend, video and voice, multiple times before, and they sounded nothing alike. Was my mom too blasé about the whole situation? Definitely. Did this guy have access to my shitty desktop, or was he just peeking in through the windows, or both? Was he pretending not to know my name? I don't know. Either way, dear creepy phone stalker, let's not meet. This happened to me a few hours ago. I live in a very rural area. Everywhere it takes me about 20 minutes to reach civilization. I went to pick up some Chinese food for a late dinner. I come up to a 4-way stoplight after picking up my food, and look both ways before turning right to head home. I make the turn, and suddenly, there is a car that flies up in back of me that had to be going about 80 miles per hour. They are inches from the back of my car. They start flicking their high beams and laying on the horn, so I decide to drive onto the shoulder to let them pass. They follow me onto the shoulder and tap the back of my car, still laying on the horn. It's pitch black, and there is no one around, so I say screw it and take off. No way was I getting out of the car. Now the problem is, I've needed to take my car to the shop for a few weeks now. I drive a bright baby blue Mini Cooper, and it has the habit of acting up when the temperature plummets like it has, and stutters, takes a while to start, takes a while to get going. The person in back of me also takes off, only to catch up way faster than I can even drive, and hits me harder. Now I'm freaking the fuck out, trying to call my boyfriend, but of course, there's absolutely no service since I live in the sticks. My car conks out, just stalls. I'm trying to get it started, and this car in the back of me is just sitting there with the high beams on and the engine running. I'm bawling my eyes out and my car starts back up on about the 5th or 6th try. So again, I'm speeding off, and this asshole is following me. I realize I am in a really dangerous situation here, and need to get to the state police barracks, which is close to my house. I can't go straight home and chance this freak finding out where I live. I make a sudden right without warning onto the back road, and they fly by me. I want to pull over to collect myself, but I decide it's a stupid idea and keep going. I'm passing a 4-way stop sign, and lo and behold, Assad is sitting at the intersection waiting for me. This person is obviously from the area, if they knew how to catch up with me. There are houses around now, so I start blowing my horn, trying to attract some attention, which I realize is pointless as I'm driving so fast. I come up to a 3-way stop now, and I need to make a left to get to the police barracks. There's a car coming to the right of me going towards the barracks, and I put on my hazards. I'm beeping the horn and activate the strobe light and keep on my keychain, trying to get this guy's attention, but before the car was even close to me, the asshole pulls up in the left lane and just sits there. I can see now that this person is driving a white Lexus with blacked out windows. I can't see who's inside, but I know they're just watching me. The fact alone that they were driving an expensive car and didn't seem to care that he rammed me twice just made me shudder. I make a left, cutting off the oncoming vehicle, hoping you'll see all my desperate attempts at an SOS. No such luck. He's turning off the road I just came from, and the Lexus is in the back of me again. Luckily, I'm getting really close to the barracks. I blow through a red light and it follows. Best part? There was a red light camera. I saw the flash and felt comfortably that there was no evidence of what was going on. I finally get to the barracks, jump out, car door still open, and run inside. I didn't even look back to see if they were still there. I tell the station everything that happened, including the red light camera. I get hold of my boyfriend and he jumps in the car to head over. My car has minimal damage, thank God, and the cops put out an APB for the Lexus. My boyfriend comes and says he thinks he may have just passed a Lexus on the way over here, so a few cops jump in the car to see if they can catch them. They don't. I'm completely horrified because my mini sticks out like a sore thumb. It's not difficult to spot me, so I'm traumatized to the point of never wanting to leave the house again. This has all been one giant horror movie for me. Hopefully in the next few weeks the camera will have caught this motherfucker. So for now, I wait. So that my creepy psycho road-rage Lexus stalker, let's not meet. I graduated high school in 2007. And despite my middle-class family existing in a relatively comfortable financial situation, they were unwilling to help pay for college. And since they made too much money, I was not eligible for any financial aid except high-interest loans. Needless to say, I was crushed as I said goodbye to most of my friends, as they embarked onto the next step of their lives. By September, I had found a pretty good job at an organic grocery store, and had more or less come to peace that my path was careening down a different direction as my peers from school. Now, while my parents did not really place much emphasis on higher education, I I had spent much of my youth being regaled by tales from my mother of her extensive travels across the country. As she likes to put it, I definitely inherited her wanderlust and passion for seeing new places. By the end of the month, I began feeling mildly depressed and lonely. I was stuck in our small town alone. I spent a lot of time working but also Skyping with my high school friends. I had a friend that I met on Neopets around 2002. I'm dating myself, I know. Who lived in Toledo, Ohio. And while we had met online, we had visited each other and hung out multiple times. She's totally awesome, we're still friends. Well, she and I decided that it would be in my best interest to take a mini vacation to visit her. As she had just moved into her own apartment, I could put me up for several days. However, I mostly biked where I needed to go, and without a car, I was unsure as to how I could get to Ohio. I lived in Chicago, and while Toledo was only 5 hours away, I knew that taking a train would be really expensive. One of my co-workers suggested I take a bus, and after a bit of research, I realized I could take a Greyhound bus for just under $60. Now, while I am, and always was, a very independent and fierce woman, there was a little concern from my co-workers, surprisingly not my folks though, about an 18-year-old girl traveling on a bus alone. I laughed, as I can be very naive about such things, and just felt grateful that my co-workers liked me enough to be concerned about my welfare. So flash forward to November, and I had my dad drop me off at the Greyhound station around 10 at night, as I was taking an overnight bus. I board without incident, and find an aisle seat next to a nondescript man who seemed content to stare out the window without so much as a word to me. While I can happily talk to anyone about anything, I was mostly hoping to catch some shut-eye, and I'd even burned several new CDs from my Walkman. Dating myself, again, I know. The bus began its journey around 11 and I settled in, with plans to zone out and listen to the mixtapes I had made for my ride. So I guess all the trouble began shortly after making our first stop somewhere in Indiana. It isn't uncommon for people to make friends or interact amongst each other, and then to switch seats to be closer to their new buds. Well, after our first stop, the girl who had been directly across the aisle had switched seats in order to be next to some guy she had been chatting up. I was blissfully unaware of this transpiring, but was not very concerned when I looked up after a short time and saw a man sitting across from me. I continued doing my thing, but maybe after 30 minutes, I could feel this guy's eyes on me. It was a dark bus, but I kept sneaking glances and realized after a few minutes that his gaze was unwavering. He caught me staring after a point, so at some point he motioned for me to take my headphones off, and I did. Like I said, I grew up pretty confident in other people, and so there was never even a concern in my mind that this man could have any lecherous intentions. I assumed that he was probably just a guy who had hit hard times. By then I had noticed that he smelled terrible. Think B.O. stale cigarettes, and the slight hint of urine, and he looked pretty rough. He was likely in his mid-40s, but looked much older. There was an aisle between us though, so I figured chatting with him was harmless. I was bored and welcoming company by then. I have since forgotten his name, but our conversation started off innocently enough. Where are you going? Where are you from? Blah, blah. The usual small talk. It became apparent though that this guy was the type who just talks and talks about things that I would rather die than tell a stranger. You know the type. He's going to visit family, but his church had to buy him a bus ticket because he hasn't worked in ages. He can't find a job. He hasn't eaten in 3 days. Stuff that I wouldn't unload on some poor 18-year-old girl on an overnight Greyhound bus. Well, after some time, He kept harping the whole "he is struggling" bit, and seemed to get resentful and sulky with me when I offered nothing but sincere apologies. I honestly did not have much cash on me, as I was only making minimum wage at the time, and while I sympathized with the guy, I needed every cent I had for my trip. At some point, the guy very pointedly told me that the reason he could not work was because he had AIDS. I empathized, as I do have several friends who are HIV positive, and I kind of figured that maybe the guy was gay. Regardless of whether or not we were family, I'm a lesbian. I was a bit put off by his pointed aggression when repeatedly telling me how poor he was. He kept suggesting that I had money I could give him, and I promised him that I did not, in fact, have surplus cash. After becoming even more sulky and mentioning several more times that he hadn't worked, was hungry after not eating for 3 days, I sighed in frustration and handed him a bag of trail mix that I had brought with me in order to avoid spending some money on food. I tried to be super kind and empathetic to people, but by then I had had enough. It was close to 4 in the morning and had not slept since the previous night, so I tried to be as cheerful and polite as possible when I told him that I was going to try and take a nap. He seemed placated by my offering of trail mix, and smiled and told me to sleep well. After putting my headphones on, I kind of settled in with my eyes closed, but found myself unable to sleep. However, I was lulled into a very relaxed state, and began to feel my nerves settling down, as this man's aggression had worked me up a bit. After about 15 minutes of peace, I began to feel that unmistakable feeling of being watched intently again. As it was dark, I kind of opened one eye a bit, and snuck a sidelong glance at the guy across the aisle. Of course, he was staring at me, unwaveringly. I shut my eye and tried to remain as still as possible, so as not to give away any inkling that I was, in fact, still awake. All of a sudden, I felt a very long nail begin to slowly scratch my head. Mind you, I'm not talking like 15 seconds. This went on from anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, and I can firmly say 8 years later that it was probably the longest minutes of my life. Of course, by now I am having a full-blown panic attack, as I really hate people, family, friends, it doesn't matter, but especially strangers touching me. After it had stopped, I tried to keep my sleep charade going, even though I could feel my lungs wanting to expel ragged breaths. I sat there, as still as possible, and once the CD had finished, I left my headphones on without starting the music again. I kept saying to myself in my head over and over, if I open my eyes and look at this guy's hands and those nails are long as fuck, I'm going to die. Like I had mentioned before, the man had smelled like the garbage, and the thought of where those fingers had been, or how long it had been since he washed his hands, sent me into a mental frenzy. A short time later, I heard the bus driver announce over the intercom that Toledo would be our next stop, and as the bus slowed down and pulled over at the terminal, the overhead lights came on. I took that opportunity to look over, and of course, all this man's nails were as long as claws. I jumped up and ran down the aisle and reached the doors before he could even open them. I still had to wait for the bus driver to get up and open the cargo hatch on the side of the bus, so I waited impatiently, hopping from foot to foot, desperate to get away. Just as the bus driver handed me my suitcase, the man emerged from the door of the bus and shouted loudly, "Hey, wait!" I should mention here that my friend who lived in Toledo worked at a 24-hour porn shop running the front counter, and since she worked a graveyard shift, which was surprisingly the busiest hours of operation, she was unable to pick me up from the station. I had map quested the distance from the bus terminal to her shop before getting on the bus, and it was only about a mile away. I had planned on walking, again, no money for a taxi. Also, I was naive, and hadn't even thought twice about it. Thankfully, my creepy encounter ended the second my fingers grabbed the plastic handle of my wheelie suitcase, and I took off running into the night, and didn't stop until I was about a quarter of a mile away. So word to the wise: if you ever find yourself travelling alone on a Greyhound bus, and begin to smell the faint scent of stale cigarettes and pee, always check the culprit's fingernails. If they are long and dirty, sit as far away as possible.